Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to offer dana, then please do go to justthiszen.org/giving. Your support really does make a huge difference. Thank you so much.
Good evening, everyone. It's really heartening to see you all appearing on the screen, and we have the very special time tonight that Flint is going to come and be with us and talk to us. And at the end of his talk, he'll be inviting people to come and meet him. So we'll record the talk, but we won't be recording the inquiry. And if you want to come and meet with Flint, then please put up your hand via the little reactions button at the bottom and put your hand up, and that'll enable Jan to come and find you easily. So please welcome Flint. It's absolutely delightful to have you with us. It's been a long time since you've been in Lancaster.
Thank you. Yeah, it's great to be here. And as always, it's a thrill to see all the faces, hear the voices. I like to come back to gallery view to make sure I can look around. It's a veritable garden of beautiful delights. And that's a way for me to begin also to say a bit about what I'd like to offer this evening to you. As is often the case these days, I look for something that speaks to me. And if it's speaking to me in my practice, then maybe it will come through as something I might want to offer to others. And I received an email just maybe 2 weeks ago from my friend Peter Levitt. Some of you know of him as a poet and as a translator, and he's worked with Kaz Tanahashi on many translations. And he sent a message to some of us, some of his friends who are teachers, and he said, I really don't like to do marketing, but many people have suggested that I let you know that Kaz and I have finished a translation, another book of translations of poems. And I will hold up the book for just a little bit so you can see. It's called Blossom Awakening. The life and poetry of the wandering monk Saigyo. And so I immediately got the book because I enjoy his translations with Kaz, and they're always amazing. And by the way, the form that Saigyo is known for is called Wagyu or Tanka. They're short. There's a certain form that they come in. But before going on, I realized after getting the book that the title is an easy one to think of in terms of cherry blossoms or spring flowers and things that you might find in poetry, things that you might find on Trudy's altar or in her garden or any one of you. But if you think about it, the title is a beautiful description of our practice. That it signifies this natural unfolding. In a bud, the blueprint is inherent, but you provide the right conditions and there's blossoming. Blossom awakening. Awakening as a blossoming, not as a change to some other kind of plant or flower or some other kind of person, but a blossoming of who and what you really are. And so what we're doing when we practice, I think, is we're helping each other provide the right conditions for blossoming, as we do in a garden. And of course, a garden requires tending, and also I think viewing, which is what we're getting to do. So just the title, I began to think about all the beautiful possibilities that were inherent in this. And of course, I thought of the many walks that I've taken with so many of you, including Josh and Trudy, but others of you in Sheffield and some other places where we've gotten to see beautiful gardens. And Saigyo is known for his poetry, wandering in nature. And one of my favorite things about being introduced to the UK so many years ago was how you like to walk. And how it's so lovely to wander in nature. So here's just a bit of a background, just so you know the context, and then I'll walk through some of these some poems in a way. I've just pulled out a few that I think that would illuminate the teachings along our walk, and how the themes of those teachings might also show up with contemporary teachers, specifically Trudy's poetry. There's a few things that I'll bring forward with my teaching. So early on, Saigyo was actually, his name was Nariko Sato before he became this wandering monk. And he served the emperor's family as a kind of a low-class guard. He was just an ordinary guard. And you have to understand, this was the end of the Heian period when elegant literature and the court culture was being developed in Japan. And so Saigyo eventually worked with this form of poetry called a waka, and it's usually in 5 phrases, 5 syllables, 7, 5, 7, and 7. The form is not crucial, but it's a 5 phrase. And I'm going to read the first few sentences that come at the beginning of the translator's introduction, because it gives you a flavor for how they feel about this teacher with his poetry. So, and I'm pretty sure this is Peter writing here. Viewing cherry blossoms and their prime under a full moon was so sublime that sadness overtook him. An erotic encounter with someone high above the clouds was exuberant to the point of tragedy. So sorrowful, so heartbroken, so full of aware, a Japanese word conveying pathos, aesthetics, poesy, and the fullness of existence. This was the life of the wandering Saigyo. So that's a bit florid and poetic itself. Here's a first example of one of Saigyo's waka poems, translated by these 2 teachers. Scattering the heart of one who can't bear parting, the spring mountain breeze entices cherry petals away. The scattering of the heart of one who can't bear parting, the spring mountain breeze entices cherry petals away. I had some conversations recently with Josh and Trudy, and I was longing to be there and to be with you, and how hard it was to leave, for example, in the spring retreat a bit earlier than I had hoped. Scattering the heart of one who can't bear parting. And it was in the spring when we were in the south of England, of course. The spring mountain breeze entices cherry petals away. It entices them away. Now, Saigyo also lived at a time that I think is somewhat similar to when we're living now, and it's one of the reasons I'm giving you some of this history, to give you the context out of which it came. It was really a dramatic time of tumult and social upheaval. It was 12th century Japan, and during that time, there was a lot of political maneuvering and abuse of the Dharma by the ruling family in Kyoto, incest, infant emperorship, all of it leading to a rapid decline of the monarchy at the end of the third and well, there had been 3.5 centuries of peace, which was kind of broken by this time. Does this all sound familiar? Even especially I like in the United States, this infant emperorship. Anyway, this resulted in the takeover by the warrior class. Another interesting thing, a profound shift in power and culture that brought the end of the Heian period, which was in Kyoto, and that was from 794 to 1185, and marked the beginning of the Kamakura period, 1185 to 1333. So Saigyo likely oversaw or foresaw really the fighting among the rulers and the soldier class that characterized the period. And he wanted freedom. He wanted to be free himself from all the actions associated with possessiveness and power and violence. Remember, he was a temple guard. It was a guard for the emperor. So he became what Peter and Kaz say, he became a samurai who denounced the sword. He had the character and spirit of a samurai with no sword. And I thought, well, God, this is our world. It was very, very similar. And also, I did this just for fun because I was very curious. Since he lived from 1118 to 1190, and I'm no historian in this regard, but this was High Middle Ages England, 1118 to 1190. 1100 was the beginning of the reign of Henry I, and many other things that go on at that time, which we don't need to go into. And then what's called the Anarchy from 1135 to 1153 with the death of Henry I. It was a civil war. And then the reign of Henry II from 1154 to 1189 until 1170, the murder of Thomas Becket was in there. Richard I, the Lionheart from 1189 to 1199, all the way to 1190, the departure for the Third Crusade. So that's a quick view, but this is the same time that we're talking about. So that gives you some context of who this poet was, when he lived, and the circumstances under which he was writing. And it's not so different than where we find ourselves. Can we practice similarly? Now, coming to the present day, in 1998, I found myself in Kyoto during a practice period in which I enrolled. And the practice period was chosen to coincide with the cherry blossoms in late March and early April in Japan. I thought it could be that I was walking exactly the same streets that Saigyo walked, along the same riverbanks, crossing the same bridges. Peter and Kaz say, for Saigyo, viewing the blossoms, no longer cherishing and enjoying them alone, but a communion with blossoms. Separation between subject and object disappeared, and his heart became the fragrance and splendor of petals. The moon for Saigyo was also his adored one, his love, his heart. Being in nature is to be awakened with nature, to be nature itself. Being in nature is to be awakened with nature, to be nature itself, to be nature itself, to realize one's immersion and oneness with nature, to wake up to one's true nature. This is the path of practice. So it was interesting to actually be in Japan at that time and to feel what it might have been like. And then fast forward a few more years, Sheffield, 2009. I think I saw Judy online. Are you here, Judy? Somewhere? Yeah, there you are. And I was walking with you and the kids and Paul at that time down the street, completely covered in pink blossoms. I don't know if you remember. at that time. And I didn't expect this in Sheffield. It was dreamlike, but it was real. And I thought, that's the way it turns out in practice, isn't it? What becomes real seems like it was a dream, and dreams suddenly reveal themselves as truth. And it's like it was more real than real, and yet ordinary. And so I walked with Judy and the family because we were on the way to a park. The blossoms weren't the destination. They were just the portal through which we moved. And that releasing of those petals continues today, I would imagine. I love so many of the flowers, the tulips in the spring in Lancaster, and also the peonies, and that sometimes they're just beginning in Sheldon when we go. And this same heart and understanding of practice as an immersion in nature and an appreciation is in Trudy's poem, The Hard Knuckles of Peonies. So I think I would like you to read it, if that's okay, Trudy. It's good to hear her voice with her poetry.
Sure. The hard knuckles of the peonies, some covered in busy, happy ants, sucking up the sweet sap, are wavering in their desire to open or to stay a tight fist railing into the bluing sky. Each year, it seems that my peony plants are in discussion with their world. How many buds, when to open, how many to sacrifice to the unpredictable elements and beasts. So each one that blooms is a joy, a present, inviting full presence to really see it.
Inviting full presence. Inviting full presence is our zazen. To really see it, to wake up, the fruit of practice. But early on, when she writes wavering in their desire to open or to stay a tight fist, it made me feel like what it's like sometimes to come into a retreat or to practice. Oh, wavering in my desire to open or to stay a tight fist. And later, my peony plants are in discussion with their world. And don't we negotiate reality? Can I do this? Should I do that? How is my life going to go? And how can I be invited into full presence? If we continue to practice and we continue to come back, we continue to study, work with the teacher, there's something that keeps inviting the full presence to really see what our life is. There's a particular thing that the translators wrote that I thought was interesting. They said, while most of the recognized poets of his time were members of the imperial court, because that's how they were supported, who composed their verses from their imaginations. As a Buddhist monk, Saigyo had the freedom to journey to actual poetic sites, to live in nature and write from his own experience. Later on, this is a side note, some of his stories were developed in Kyoto in the No Theater, which made him kind of legendary. And we do the same thing, we read about practice. We get every new book that comes along, but actually doing the practices together, immersing ourselves in the sitting and walking and studying, having tea, opening to each other, comforting each other. This is the kind of garden tending which are setting the conditions for blossoming awakening. Actually immersing ourselves, as Saigyo did, in nature, and then practicing from deep, deep experience. Here's a living moment of one of his wandering journeys, which I like since it's autumn, certainly here. Since the wind carries so many tender feelings through the treetops, I know it's autumn in this deep mountain village. Since the wind carries so many tender feelings through the treetops, I know it's autumn in this deep mountain village. The tender feelings through the treetops, what could that possibly mean? And how does it suggest to him that it's autumn? There are things that we know, and there's so much more that we don't know. And Saigyo is suggesting this, that, but he places himself right in the present moment. He said, in this deep mountain village, he knows where he is. But then in terms of your own practice and inquiry, what are the signs, maybe the tender feelings through the treetops here, but what are the signs that lead you into your own life and to the lives of the ones you love? What are the signs that invite you and what blocks you? From where we live in just to the west of Santa Fe, we live on a ridge, and driving around, it's actually called Ridgetop Road, and then to get on the highway to go into town, you're high up looking through a valley, and then there are the mountains in the distance, and the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. And about a month ago, I noticed some spots on the mountain that looked like they had been clear cut. It was dark. Didn't look like green anymore. And I wondered what it was. Aaron and I thought about it, and we came the next day or two, and then there were more of them. And then they began to get larger, and then they turned yellow. And it was the aspen. The valley is full of aspen trees turning, letting us know it's autumn in this village. What are the signs that we use to know when it is? I'm going to read one of Trudy's poems now. We don't know our seasons. And the first line begins, we don't know our seasons. Unlike the buds that are unfurled just and so until the green shoots pushing through the crumbling earth. Unlike the lambs that slowly give up their gambling addiction to become slow grazers. We don't know the seasons to be open, safe, loved, and loving. So we wait endlessly for better weather, softer clouds, no rain, more rain, less sorrow. Not knowing that's the season, not knowing that the season is always now, not knowing that the season is always now. We go to all this trouble to be here now. And it turns out this is where we've always been, and we're always going to be. Where else could we be? We don't arrive in some new destination through practice, but we might realize that we're home. We don't know our seasons, but we can find where we are. What would a shift like this mean in your life? To find yourself home, to use not knowing as a way to arrive instead of having to know. On a pilgrimage to a place called Ise, the site of an important shrine he wanted to visit, Saigyo passed a mountain called Mount Shuzuka. He wrote, Mount Shuzuka, since I've cast away this floating world, what will become of my life? Mount Shuzuka, since I've cast away this floating world, what will become of my life? The term floating world, if you don't know, was adapted from the older Buddhist concept of a sorrowful world and was used to describe the sorrowful world or the floating world is this sort of fleeting, glamorous lifestyle focused on pleasures and stylishness and ungrounded, hence the word floating. So the way I think about it, and the question for you is, if ordinary life is left behind, at least as my focus or the center, then what's going to become of me? The self that I've created to fit the floating world. What's going to happen? On the same trip in which I was walking among the cherry blossoms in Kyoto, our group also visited Mount Koya, sometimes called Koyasan. When you arrive at the base of the mountain, there's I think it's called a funicular, the little train that goes up, very steep. That's the only way to get up there. There are no roads to get up there. You cannot drive, and it's too steep. Well, I guess you could climb maybe. There are 120 temples at the top of the mountain. It's one of the most sacred places in Japan. So I found myself in a place unlike anywhere I'd ever been before. It was startling and odd and beautiful and powerful. And it was ancient. The first temple was built in 805. It was mystically beautiful, very much apart from the floating world. And being in that rare environment on Koyasan made me think, what is my life becoming? How did I end up here? What am I doing? And one of the most remarkable things on Koyasan, at least for me, were not the temples. I mean, they were amazing and it was beautiful, and we got to go to many services and see different things that we wouldn't see otherwise. But the most powerful thing for me was the cemetery leading up to and surrounding the great temple of Kobo Daishi. It was a very famous monk who elevated and stimulated practice in Japan at a certain time. Let me see if this may be a little awkward, but I wanted to show you this. This is not a great way to see it. You can't see it as beautifully as I'd like it, but this is coming up to the temple. Can you see that? So that's the front of the temple, and you can see how many burial sites there are. But this is not actually how it feels when you're there, to me. And it's vast. I mean, you walk a long way before you arrive at this particular place. Let's see. That's what it looks like. That's what it feels like. And it goes on and on, and the most unusual statuary and various things like that you're able to see. And I wanted to show it to you so that you could kind of get a sense of the feeling of the place, because walking through it is very transformative, at least I thought. And I was walking with this question: what's becoming of my life now that I'm practicing? Is the question I'm asking you to think about today. What's becoming of you? The verse of the Han I could hear as I walked: great is the matter of birth and death, all is impermanent, quickly passing. Awake, awake, don't waste this precious life. The old stones, that you could kind of see, the great trees, the statues covered in lichens and moss. There were rows and rows and tiers of Jesus statues along the pathways. And every single thing there was marking something of someone's life. One day, along the edge of these kind of paths on Khoisan, but in a different area, and then during a drier part of the year, I showed you that foggy time, Saigyo was on Khoisan and he encountered a tombstone. He ran into one for an ancient poet that he knew that had died in 999. And he respected his ancestors, and he found different signs of them in nature in some of his poetry. But in this case, he wrote the following, and it does sound a little different because it talks about dryness. The poet's name alone has not decayed. I see this dried up field of pampas grass as his memorial. The poet's name alone has not decayed. I see this dried up field of pampas grass as his memorial. You hear his reflection on its nature, its life. It's what I'm immersed in. That is the memorial to a life. It's what's around you, what you're immersed in, what you cultivate, what you tend. What's the garden that you tend? That's your memorial. Even though your name may still be on the stone, even though so much of it has decayed, people might remember your name, but will they remember your life? On that same trip, traveling to the west coast of Japan with Blanche to visit the grave of Joshin-san at Entaiji, was the temple of Kodo Sawaki Roshi, Homo's Kodo. Joshin-san, is, some of you probably remember, was the Japanese teacher who brought the Nyoe sewing to the United States, and Blanche became one of the Dharma heirs for this type of sewing. She transmitted it to Blanche. And Blanche had found out while we were there that Joshin-san's grave stone, like you saw in that cemetery, had been placed at her ashes site at Entaiji. And so she came to me one day and she said, would you go with me and accompany me? We're going to leave the group in Kyoto and go to the west coast of Japan and go up to Entaiji. And of course, I'm not going to say, no, I don't think so. I think, I said, of course I would. And as we traveled up the west coast of Japan, that was equally interesting. We go in a tunnel and come out, and it would be the Sea of Japan. And if you could see far enough, you would be able to see China. And then there'd be small islands and very much postcard-like in some ways. And we finally arrived. We were on the bullet train, which was an amazing, that's a whole nother story, an experience. Arrived at this small village. And we got to the village, we went into a store, and Blanche said, we need to take gifts. So we bought these huge bottles of sake for the abbot and for the monks. And then we hired a taxi to take us to the top of the mountain where Entaiji was. It was like a little road, and switchback turn, and then we go again in this taxi. And we got almost to the top, and as we came around one bend, I could see these stone steps, a staircase into the side of the mountain that just went up into the forest and it disappeared. But we kept on going around and got to the top where those steps went. And the afternoon, we, met with the abbot, and we walked through the fields and the gardens where Joshin-san had lived during this different parts of the year. Later in her life, when she came back to Entaiji, she came there in the winter. She couldn't walk up the steps, and so the monks would carry her up the steps, up to the temple and to her hut, because she wanted to arrive before there was too much snow, so she could get in. And when we got there, the gravestone had been set in place, and her name was inscribed, like the stone in Saigyo's discovery on Mount Koyun. But it was the small hut, which is a little decayed, and the fields and the path between the buildings, which are her memorials. This is where she walked, where she lived. And I remember us taking a look at the stone and paying our respects, but what Blanche wanted to do was sit on her porch and to walk the paths. Oftentimes, our path is not so clear. And it might be steep or really challenging, like the steps up to Entaiji. And we can easily lose our way without each other's presence or without the help of our teacher or spiritual friends. Here's Saigyo. When snow falls, burying the paths of mountains and fields, beneath the sky of my journey, I can't tell here from there. When snow falls, burying the paths of mountains and fields beneath the sky of my journey, I can't tell here from there. We're back to not knowing. Even so, haven't you ever welcomed a storm? The wind and the rain. Sometimes it's clarifying or cleansing. Recently, I did get a note from Josh and Trudy. I think Mary might have been there too. They stay in the lakes, and I think the weather was not as they had hoped. And yet, each of them spoke in their own way about the beauty of the darkened skies, in the rain, in the slate gray lakes, in the cold wind. Everything was completely alive. Everything was completely itself. Saigyo again, with the roaring sound, how could my heart not become clear? Grasses and trees bow down in the storm. What do you bow to? Does it take a storm? Does it take a roar? Or could it take a whimper to invite your heart to be more clear? Recently we lost a member of the larger Sangha more suddenly than we'd hoped. It was shocking and sad. And Emma, a relatively young woman who's part of the larger Dharma family, passed. Sometimes we get these kinds of shocks. In the year 1145, Empress Tamako passed away at age 45, a young woman. And Saigyo knew her. They were friends. At the time that she died, he was only 28. And he thought it would be good to send his condolences to the primary attendant of the Empress. And this is his note. Even if we asked, the wind could not tell us where she's gone, the one who fell like a flower. Even if we asked, the wind could not tell us where she's gone, the one who fell like a flower. You could think of Emma or another friend in the same way. And then a woman, Horikawa, who was the attendant who had received Saigyo's poem, wrote back, indicating her loyalty to the Empress. She wrote, "If the blowing wind would let me know where she has gone, I would not wait to fall like a flower." If the blowing wind would let me know where she has gone, I would not wait to fall like a flower. Grief has its own way. Whether it's the loss of a loved one or maybe some dream or hope we have, an unrequited love, a secret clinging that's torn away. The attendant, immediately I would go if I knew where she was. And Saigyo also had a particular affinity for Sutoko, who was the first son of the Empress Tamako, the one who died. Saigyo and Sutoko were born just 1 year apart. And in the face of everything the young son had lost and the terrible political situation in the country that I was mentioning, Sutoko decided, even as he was part of the ruling class, he decided to enter a temple and shaved his head. He became a monk. So Saigyo went to visit him during this period of grief. And they met just outside the temple one night when the moon was apparently clear and bright. Remember, the moon was another thing Saigyo really loved. So they met outside that evening. And the beauty of the evening seemed to sadden the boy further. And he wrote to Saigyo, "Even in such a world, the moon's clear light doesn't change. Yet I resent that I still see it. You can hear the searing grief of the sun. Even in such a world, the moon's clear light doesn't change. No matter what horrible things are happening, the light doesn't, the moon is still rises and it sets and it's beautiful. Yet I resent that I still see it. We can get so tangled in our longing and grief and attachment and our attempts at renunciation. And this is completely human, of course. This is how we are. In fact, this is the field of practice, not its opposite. These tangles, this grief, these attachments, this way of attempting to let go. So I'll invite Trudy, the rough gray green.
The rough grey-green fronds of the yellowing tamarisk sway in the breeze. I look at how it fills up the window, spoiling my view of the sea. Then as I settle, I can see how it is home to so much life. Robins, whitethroats, maybe even goldcrests who defy my labelling, and numerous butterflies flitting. And of course all the life unseen that does not require my gaze or knowledge to exist. I'm here for only 1 week, and yet I can have a thought that my pleasure and my preference should have precedence over need. And I feel shame and sorrow at the essential human tragedy of that. It seems so very easy to lean into our separateness and to make the luminous, connected world our broken playground. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Thank you. And I love life as I, too, am loved.
That would be a good one to read several times, but we don't have the time. All the life unseen that does not require my gaze or knowledge to exist. As we let ourselves drop in the self-centered dream. And the feeling of shame and sorrow at the essential human tragedy of that, the universality of it, it's not even my particular sin, if you will. And then the sorrowful request for forgiveness and the gratitude and the reminder, I love life as I am loved. And we learn another part of, I guess, vanity. Saigyo is very human preferences. There was a famous poet, Toshinari Fujiwara, who is the most prestigious poet at the time. And so Saigyo wrote to him and sent him a bunch of his poems. And he also wanted to demonstrate his admiration for the poet. And when I read Trudy's poems, or I listen to her read them, I think about what I hope for, and maybe creating a shared collection of our teachings. And then my uncertainty arises along with my uneasy feeling that it might be vanity to think like this. Really? You know, not that I don't feel that about her poems, I do, but like, I don't know. But along with the collection of poems, Saigyo wrote this. This was his note. Although these words are not flowers, you might pick one to see the color it holds inside. Like I've picked these of Trudy's. Surprisingly, Saigyo received a gracious reply from the famous poet. So he had written, although my words are not flowers, you might pick one to see the color it holds inside. And the Toshinari wrote, in the words of one who left this world to enter the way, the color of deep feelings is clear. The color of deep feelings is clear. Ultimately he selected 18 of Saigyo's poems and placed them in the Imperial Anthology for the first time. And just a bit more, I know I'm taking a long time, that renunciation, the antidote to the shame and sorrow that Trudy mentioned, you know, being caught by preferences can that can have precedent over everyday life, which is, she weaves so beautifully in her poem. We offer our chant of confession and repentance. We did it earlier, all my ancient type of karma. This is our entry. In the preparation for a fall retreat, Saigyo wrote, since my heart stays attached to things, I grow weary of the world. He can feel the suffering. It's interesting that his attachments were seen as the suffering, the source of the suffering, so that he would grow weary of this world through his attachment. But there's another place, and I'll read this one. This is the ground. Although the poem has the first person in it, but I want to stand there too. So I'll read Trudy's poem. This is the ground on which I stand. This is the ground on which I fall. And this is the ground on which I rise again. Suzuki Roshi said, things as it is, that is the thisness on which I stand. No place or time, but the constant impermanent thusness of each moment, opening to everything and letting everything go, standing, falling, rising. Only this, and this, and this. This is the ground on which I stand. And sometimes we're surprised when we feel the relief of that, and then we get caught again. Saigyo wrote, it makes no sense. I thought I'd given up everything. Now the water is frozen in the bamboo pipe. I long for spring. I thought I was free, but no. It takes just these ordinary things in our everyday life to show us where we're attached. And this is what we practice with. And if you think, or you're not sure that you're attached in some way, just look around for where the suffering is, and you'll find it there. Saigyo wrote, do those who renounce the self truly renounce? Not renouncing is indeed renouncing. Now, what? That sounds like one of those Zen things. Now, a self attempting to renounce a self is a self-centered action, a materialistic attempt to enter a space of freedom or awakening. So you don't wake up. Wakefulness wakes up. It blossoms as you open the hand and let go. And even in doing so, sometimes you might lose your way. Is one of the poems that Trudy has written about the moon in the bucket. There's one that will finish our talk here. She'll read. I started looking for the moon. And if you want to say anything else about the context, just so they get it, but I may be clear.
So I'd written the poem about looking for the moon in the bucket, and it had it kind of came from a place of something making sense, and then of course it stopped making sense. So this was a response. I started looking for the moon in a bucket again. It had for a while fallen into its true place in the heavens, but now the sweet relief of failure is itself failing, yielding to a deep pinching sorrow. The sky is dark, no fingernail moon to shift its way across the stars. Searching in a puddle, I can't lift myself to look in the rightful place. Waiting, eyes down, for a glimmer of returning light, and leaning into the embrace of others who know the moon's true trajectory. Being held while I wait to find the moon in the sky again.
Leaning into the embrace of others. Being held while I wait to find the moon in the sky again. We return. I was really struck by the waiting, eyes down, for a glimmer of returning light. How we, especially if we feel ashamed, that sort of, we know where we could look, but sometimes we don't. And this also is reflection of what it's like to be with a teacher or to engage ourselves in inquiry, leaning into the embrace of others, being held while I wait to find the moon in the sky, while I wait to find myself again. Even as I let go of the floating world and see what practice has done to me. So I hope this walk through these things, I know it's quite a bit, helps you meet some of these same questions that Saigyo was carrying with him, and some of the ways in which um, hopefully the contemporary words of Trudy has helped maybe illuminate them in a more ordinary way. And some of my stories from traveling to those places and seeing some of those may have brought some life to it. I know I've used up most of our time, but there might be some questions or things that you might want to ask or say, and I'm sure we can have a few minutes. That'd be okay. And it's certainly fine just to sit with all of this. I mentioned recently, I think the way I said it recently was, it's easy to teach Buddhism, it's harder to teach Zen. You can teach the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, the 12-Fold Chain of Causation, all those things are content that you can teach and they're useful. They're very, very useful. But to simply enter the space of questioning deeply in the ways that these questions have unfolded, this blossom awakening, is a different thing. But Mary, come into the garden with me here. There you go.
Hi. I don't know why, but I want to respond with a poem, a Saigyo poem. Close to my hut, on a hilly rice field, I was startled by the voice of a deer. Then I surprised the deer.
Yeah. Who touches who? How does it get through? What are the circumstances to allow yourself to see and to hear and to be seen and to be heard? Read it again. Would you read it again?
Close to my hut, on a hilly rice field, I was startled by the voice of a deer. Then I surprised the deer.
Close to each other's heart.
It's,
Yes.
it's
And in England, isn't there some deer called a heart?
I think there are.
Different word, but
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's that not being separate.
Mhm.
And what you were saying about we are part of nature.
Mhm.
Our hearts are beating together.
That's right. Yeah, it's not that we are connected to nature. We are nature.
Mm.
And so the blossoming, awakening, I think, is altogether an appropriate way to think about it. Mhm.
So beautiful.
Yeah. I hope that in the UK, you can access the recording that Jane Goodall did before she died. Have some of you seen it?
I haven't seen it yet, but I think we can. Yeah.
It will follow this teaching, Mary. So please. Mhm. In the United States, it's on Netflix.
Mm.
It's her last message. It left me breathless and tearful.
Thank you.
Mhm.
So good to see you.
It's good to see you. And one of the particular things I loved about her is that she was in this unusual studio built just for this interview. And she said that when she talked, because of her age and things, she requires a little whiskey to loosen her vocal cords and to clear her throat. And so she had her little whiskey that all through the talk, she would have a little, she had a wee dram that she still, Trudy.
Just this was the first poem I wrote for you when we were on retreat, and the birds are very at that spring they're so noisy in Sheffield. They're sort of really wonderful, and we were walking outside, and I just remember I had to write it, and then I had to give it to you. It's, part of something. It was a small bird sang in a tree. I couldn't find it. Walking slowly. I wondered if she could hear me singing.
It's a wonderful echo of Mary's.
That's
What's it like for you to find that I've woven your poems in?
tearful, terrifying, wonderful. They don't feel like mine. I have this real sense once they're somewhere else. I sometimes read them and I don't even know I've written them. Like, did I write that one? Because they feel like something happens and then they fly. So it's very lovely.
And then someone, in this case me, someone finds meaning in them and finds them to be just the thing to go somewhere to invite other people to their blossoming awakening. So they come to life, they come back to life, they come into a new life. Something, it's like a new season in the garden. Yeah. It's obviously I've done this recently a couple of times, so it means that wants to happen.
Hmm.
So thank you very, very much.
Thank you.